The members of the Straw Hat crew are united, ready to face Arlong and his pirates. Their navigator has asked for help and Luffy is going to provide it. He smashed down the door of Arlong Park and asked for the Fishman himself. But we have to go back to the start of the arc to ask a couple of questions. Who is Arlong, and why is Luffy here in this moment? And of course, what is the point of East Blue? Last part I established that Arlong Park is a culmination of the East Blue. So what type of villain suits this sort of story? Well, a culmination of all the worst parts of the East Blue. Notably, its villains. Arlong has shades of each villain that we've faced so far, but with a twist. We'll work our way backwards. Don Krieg was all about obsession with things. He determined that strength was from what he had in his possession, his weapons, his armada, even the knowledge at his disposal. Arlong doesn't define his strength from his tools, his weapons, not even his crew. No, he defines his strength by his genetics. What makes him strong, what makes him superior, is the fact that Arlong is a fishman, that he has natural strength, powerful teeth, an unbreakable nose, his abilities in the water. This is what makes him the best, what makes him suited to rule over others. Kuro was about taking advantage of others, lying to them, betraying them. In the case of Kaya, Kuro isolated her. Arlong deceives Nami and isolates her from the village, takes advantage of her skill in cartography and ultimately betrays her. From the beginning, he intended to make her draw maps for him until she was no longer convenient. His promise to free her village was a lie all along. Buggy had taken up residence in a village that he destroyed at his pleasure, and he was also someone obsessed with wealth. Arlong has taken up residence on an island and demonstrably has destroyed villages within it. He's been accumulating wealth there for the last 8 years, and he says that money is the only thing you can believe in when communicating with Nezumi. We don't know Buggy's end goal for his wealth, but Arlong claims that he will use his to eventually rule the East Blue. Oh, and they're also both pirates that have come from the Grand Line. Morgan ruled by fear and demanded tribute from the citizens. His son could strut around Shell's town doing as he pleased due to the citizens fearing retaliation from Morgan. Arlong certainly rules by fear, and all fishmen can essentially do as they please, with the villagers fearing retaliation if they do anything to them, and those that fail to pay Arlong's tribute, they die. And as for Arlong's shade of Alvida, well, both of them get punched in the face by Luffy. Then, as mentioned in the last part, Arlong also demonstrates the Warlord System moments after it's introduced, in an unofficial capacity, and I think it's a pretty apt demonstration from what we experience of the Warlord System in the future. A pirate abusing immunity from marine prosecution and causing devastation on whichever island they take up residence in. Arlong even uses the Marines to further his nefarious goals, which again we'll see from Warlords in the future. It's pretty common knowledge at this point to point out that the 7 Warlords were not part of the original plan for One Piece, but I think it's no coincidence that Arlong mirrors future Warlords we see so closely. Rather, I think it's in the definition of Arlong that I personally think Oda used to shape the Warlords, not the other way around. While I'm on the topic, I think it's also worthwhile to mention Nezumi and the role that he serves. I explicitly pointed out last part that the Marines that serve under him are faceless. We don't see their eyes. This is different from when we met Morgan and the Marines that served under him. While Nezumi and Morgan are both villainous Marine captains, in Morgan's case, the Marines that serve under him are humanized. They're following orders out of fear, and some even go against him. In Nezumi's case, it's the opposite. This time the Marines that serve under Nezumi are not supposed to be shown as people. They are the faceless military machine of the world government. Nezumi has a face. He can be singled out as a bad guy. He can become a target of ire. But the faceless Marines that serve under him are just as culpable as him. Axe-Hand Morgan is at least strong. He's imposing. If you go against his orders, you will get cut down. But Nezumi? He certainly doesn't demonstrate any degree of strength. Without obedient drones, Nezumi could do nothing. Nojiko wouldn't have gotten shot, and Nami's treasure wouldn't have gotten taken away. It is the faceless, humanityless Marines that perform these acts in his name. So what does Nezumi teach us about the world government? That they have power because the people under them follow orders without thought or feeling. That the ordinary men and women of the Marines could become the reserve police battalion of the One Piece world. That got a bit heavy, but one last thing about Nezumi. He is the one that is responsible for Luffy's first bounty, for turning Luffy into a wanted man. And for what? Not for defeating Arlong, that's for sure. No, Luffy gets his first bounty because he put a stop to marine corruption. He stopped Marines from abusing their power against civilians. I just found it interesting, so I thought I'd point it out. Back to Arlong. Something unique to Arlong is his underlying motives behind his actions. His hatred, specifically his racial hatred. Arlong hates humans, he despises them. He seems cordial when interacting with Nezumi, but that's just because it benefits him. When he has no reason to be polite, his true feelings come out. Puny, pathetic, weak, worthless. That's what humans are to him. Fishmen are superior, evolved, the master race, lords of creation. Due to this hatred he has of humans, Arlong has become the object of his hatred and taken on the likeness of a celestial dragon, espousing superiority and requiring tribute from those beneath him. Though I won't go further than that. Instead, I'll just throw Arlong's hatred of humans into the chest. Luffy, on the other hand, well, he's just Luffy. There's no history of hatred, no feelings of superiority. He has joined this fight for one reason only, because Nami asked him for help. And more personally for Luffy, Arlong made Nami cry. That's it. I'll try to keep from repeating points from previous parts, but Luffy isn't here for any bigger reason than that. To put it bluntly, he doesn't give a damn about Cocoa Village or the island under Arlong's rule. Why should he be? His response when he sees Marines entering the village? He doesn't have one. He's more interested in Genzo's pinwheel. When Nojiko gets shot, he's not particularly perturbed, but he hears Nami shouting, so he comes over and asks if she wants his help. Of course, she rejects him, but even his response to that is, what's her problem? Like, Luffy, my guy, read the room, but no, Luffy doesn't do that. He's just like, I asked if she wanted help, she didn't need to yell at me, jeez. And that's the whole point. Luffy doesn't care about any of it. It's all extra stuff that doesn't matter. It seems a bit odd when Luffy goes for a walk instead of sticking around to hear about Nami's backstory, but that was his position back when he first met Nami over 60 chapters ago. The person Luffy met then, the one who had strong enough ideals to put her life on the line, the one who put herself in harm's way to try and protect Luffy. Ever since that moment when Luffy declared that she was their navigator, the Nami who exists in the present is the one that Luffy cares about. That's why he furiously rebuked Johnny when he said Nami killed Usopp, because the Nami that Luffy knows would never do that. It doesn't matter where she's from, what she's done, any of that stuff. The Nami of today is Luffy's navigator, and the only reason Luffy is here is to get her back. The more I read it, it's actually startling how short of a time Luffy is on the island before Nami asks him for help. He literally crash lands, gets told Nami killed Usopp, gets rejected by Nami, has a nap, Usopp reappears, then Luffy goes for a walk, sees Genzo, follows him, I assume just watches as the whole Marine steal Nami's treasure situation happens, offers help, gets rejected again, Nami runs off, and then shortly after, watches again as the villagers prepare to fight Arlong, Nami tries to stop them, and then, as Nami starts stabbing herself in the arm, Luffy stops her. It's probably been like, what, 3 hours? All he's heard of Arlong is Yosaku's explanation on the way here, which he barely understood, Zoro saying that Arlong had Usopp, Johnny saying Nami is part of Arlong's pirates, Nojiko saying that they'll never defeat Arlong, and that's it. The only reason Luffy knows that Arlong is who he needs to beat is because Nami was shouting his name while stabbing herself. So when Luffy busts down the door and says, "Which one is Arlong?" Yeah, it's badass, but quite literally like, who is he? Luffy has no idea. And so we find ourselves at Arlong Park, and Luffy has one mission: beat the snot out of Arlong. It's hilarious at the start. Luffy just walks up to Arlong, introduces himself, knocks out a couple of dudes, and then just socks Arlong right in the face. Luffy is angry. Arlong made our navigator cry. The panel gives me a similar vibe to the laugh at Usopp and I'll kill you one. If Luffy cares about someone, he will allow no disrespect. And pretty much the whole chapter is Luffy just repeating the idea of, I'm here to beat up Arlong. He doesn't care about the other fishmen, about Mumu, he just takes care of them in the fastest way he can think of because he's here to clobber Arlong, not them. That is Luffy's setup for the fight half of this arc. Arlong is also getting riled up, but for different reasons. There's only one thing we know Arlong hates more than anything else: getting disrespected by those inferior humans. His first genuine rage was when Usopp dared to attack him, and seeing the aftermath of his fellow fishmen getting decimated by Zoro made him so angry that he wasn't even sure that killing Usopp would make him feel better. And then this guy comes strolling in and pushes all of Arlong's buttons, first disrespecting him by punching him in the face, and then making it worse by taking out the rest of the fishmen. Though we should note, I'm not seeing any blood from the first blow landed on Arlong, or no mark at all really. It's a good visual way of showing that Arlong really is a cut above all the other villains that Luffy has punched in the face up to this point. The next chapter is probably one of my favourite comedy chapters, as Luffy's rash behaviour has resulted in him getting completely stuck, and Oda introduces us to our fight pairings. I also love that Luffy being stuck is the initiator for them as well. Sanji jumps in to protect Luffy from getting smushed, which impresses Kurubi. Then Zoro stops Hachi to protect the stuck Luffy. Then Usopp accidentally lets go of Luffy, launching him into Chu, who chases down Usopp as a result. It almost feels as though Luffy's anger has been tempered a little as he realizes his predicament, resulting in some hilarious panels. But then Arlong comes along and raises the stakes, throwing the stuck Luffy into the water, adding a time pressure to the rest of the crew to rescue him. We'll return to our two captains shortly, but let's talk about some standout moments from the fights. We'll start with Sanji. I like that he's the first one to be concerned about Zoro's wounds. I think it goes to show that, firstly, Zoro's duel with Mihawk did leave such a strong impression on him that it's still in the forefront of Sanji's mind. He even brought it up to push Zoro's buttons earlier. But also that Sanji is caring and is thinking about Zoro's well-being before his own. He's in the middle of his own fight after all. He's so concerned about Zoro that he ends up taking quite a blow, a Fishman karate blow. I think that's the first we've heard of Fishman karate, so let's throw it in the chest. We do also see that Sanji hasn't lost his streak of self-sacrifice, jumping into the water mid-fight against a Fishman to make sure that Zoro does not. Next, our boy Usopp. I think this fight is very important for Usopp as it shows a bit of a turning point. We start off with Usopp at his lowest. He's playing dead, rubbing dirt on himself so he can pretend that he tried harder than he actually did. He's already preparing responses to the crew, his apologies, his excuses, his deflections. And as he does, he thinks about his brave crewmates, the brave villagers, people risking their lives in front of him, Luffy asking, "Aren't we a team?" He realizes that if he is to change, he can no longer be the person that he once was. He left his village declaring that he would become a brave warrior of the sea, and the only way to do that is to change himself, to not live in fear but to live wholeheartedly, to become a crewmate worthy of his brave shipmates. So, in classic Usopp fashion, his legs begin to shake and he faces his fears. If he loses, he dies, and that's what it means to be a pirate. He isn't about living a life of safety anymore. And that's what makes this fight great. Usopp isn't smooth, he isn't cool, he isn't graceful, but what can Usopp do? He'll do what he can. It's messy, it's underhanded, but it's Usopp using everything in his arsenal. Alcohol, fire, hammer, a rubber band of doom. Even his final blow panel is a fake out. His actual final impact of the fight is off-screened. But the real success panel is this. Even I can win if I try. This moment of realization that he can actually do it, his joy at being able to tell in one small panel, stumbling over his words that, "Nami, I beat one of Arlong's officers." Me. The happiness at the fact that he's not lying. Nami, while not having a physical fight, resolves her inner conflict. Yes, it was in desperation that she asked Luffy for help, but having calmed her tears, she races to Arlong Park. When hope seems lost and Arlong confronts her with another choice that will trap her for the rest of her days, like when she was watching Luffy, the sun rises in her eyes once more. She grabs onto the treasure that Luffy entrusted her with and consciously chooses to believe in Luffy. More than that, she finally lets go of her burden, the driving force that has been keeping her with Arlong, the fear that her village will die. So, smiling, she asks the village she's been trying to keep safe for 8 years, that she's tried stopping twice from marching to their deaths. Fight and die with me. And of course, the village cheers. Zoro is fresh off of his loss to Mihawk and a declaration to Luffy, and we see him reflecting on it throughout his fight. He declares that he cannot die until he confronts Mihawk again. When Hachi comes at him with 6 swords, he knows that it's not about the number of swords. Mihawk could stop his 3 with just a tiny dagger. It's about the swordsman wielding the sword, the weight of their conviction. And Zoro cannot fall, he cannot die, he has to live to defeat Mihawk. Then he flashily defeats Hachi. But that's not all to say about Zoro. I think his best moment is actually here, when Arlong has him by the throat and tears off Zoro's bandages to reveal his wound from Mihawk, and Zoro glares at him. This is what I was talking about when I was talking about Zoro not losing ever again. Sure, you can look at this situation and say, oh yeah, Zoro is dead to rights here, he's totally lost to Arlong. Well, tell that to Zoro. He hasn't conceded yet, and I'm inclined to take Arlong's word for it. Are they the eyes of a dying man? Arlong is a Grand Line pirate, a member of the infamous Fishman pirates. He has sailed with legends, and when he looks into the eyes of a man who, by all accounts, should be passed out if not dead from his wounds, he thinks, I'd better finish him off right now. Arlong recognizes Zoro as a threat, even in his current condition, that Zoro staying alive is dangerous. Remember, this is the dude who's been looking down on humans this whole arc, and he sees a nearly dead Zoro and thinks, I'm not gonna risk leaving this guy alive. That doesn't sound like a defeat to me. Luffy finally gets freed from his predicament and, what is this translation? Trade you places? What? Either way, hilariously, Luffy launches the nearly dead Zoro into the sky with absolutely no regard for his well-being. Arlong has demonstrated he is a cut above other fishmen and is furious from seeing his fisherman comrades getting defeated one by one. Luffy has a quick warm-up, throwing several iconic blows, a bell that defeated Kuro, a whip that took out a group of marines, a bullet that knocked out Alvida, and a Gatling that took out a souped-up Black Cat pirate crew. Yet Arlong gets up, seemingly unaffected. And finally, the real fight between Arlong and Luffy can start. Well, not quite yet. Instead, we get some of the best Luffy characterization we've had since the start of the series. Luffy often has ideological clashes with those he fights against, but it's shown more through moments throughout the fight. This time we get it laid out at the start. Arlong tries to get Luffy to start talking about racial differences, and Luffy, well, he does, but he does it in a way that dismisses Arlong's ideology. Arlong wants Luffy to say that they're different because Luffy is a human and Arlong is a fishman, and so Arlong is bigger, stronger, better in water, etc, etc. Instead, Luffy does point out the racial differences, but in a way that diminishes their importance. Noses, chins, webbed toes, and webbed toes is the last thing he mentions. Luffy can care about appearances. He likes Genzo's pinwheel, for example, but he's never assigned superiority or inferiority based on it. When Luffy makes a comment about appearance, it's either in a matter-of-fact way or he finds it cool. So talking about racial differences in a superficial way angers Arlong, who once again tries to outline his racial superiority to Luffy, who once again takes it superficially. Yeah, sure, your teeth can crush stone, but so can my fists, so it's not that impressive. So once more, Arlong keeps spouting off. Humans are weak, stupid, foolish, they can't swim. And how does Luffy respond to this third attempt to drag him into a fight contextualized by race? Maybe I can't do anything, but I have friends who will rescue me. Arlong talks about groups, in this case species, and Luffy talks about individuals. Then we get my favorite Luffy line. I don't know how to use a sword, I don't know how to navigate, I can't cook, and I can't tell lies. I know I can't live without help from a lot of people. I love this so much. It's not just the fact that Luffy is realistic about his shortcomings, or the fact that he's demonstrated numerous times up to this point that, yeah, he's pretty much useless on his own. It's the fact that it reveals how Luffy thinks about his crew. He isn't just finding people he likes to fill up the ranks, but he knows and appreciates what everyone else can do that he cannot. That quite literally, he cannot become Pirate King without his crew. But what can Luffy do? Well, it goes all the way back to Chapter 1. The safety of the entire ship and crew rests on a captain's shoulders. And what does that mean to Luffy? Why is Luffy suited to be the captain of a crew more capable than he is? Because Luffy can beat Arlong. Now, finally, we can fight. The fight is great, but what do we learn from it? I think this is a great example of Luffy's creativity while fighting. Some creativity that works, and some that does not. Luffy has great flexibility and imagination when fighting. I hope he'll get some ability that lets him take full advantage of this in the future. Surely it won't be too long until that appears. Otherwise, the theme of this fight is very reminiscent of Luffy's fight with Krieg. While Krieg was obsessed with this weapon, so over the course of the fight Luffy dismantled them all, Arlong is obsessed with his racial traits, his invincible teeth that can shatter rock, so Luffy breaks his teeth and mocks them too, making them look goofy. Arlong can launch himself from the water with great speed. Well, let's catch him in a net and spear him like a fish. Arlong's prized, unbreakable, unscratchable nose? Luffy bends it. When Arlong pulls out a terrifying weapon, his shark saw, well, Luffy crushes a part of it with his bare hands too. In the same way the fight with Krieg was Oda saying again and again, it's not about what you have, it's about who you are. With Arlong, the message is, it's not about what you are, it's about who you are. When fighting brings Luffy and Arlong into Nami's room, or the chart room, whichever you prefer, the fight shifts. Luffy wonders what the room is, and Arlong, quite charitably may I add, explains that this is the room where Nami draws all of her charts. And here we learn what makes Luffy and Arlong different, in a way that's different from the previous East Blue villains. Remember, Arlong has traits of all the previous East Blue villains, and each villain taught us about Luffy, why they fell short when they came up against him. From Alvida we learned that a crew needs to trust their captain. From Morgan we learned that Luffy trusts his crew. From Buggy we learned that Luffy values personal treasure over material wealth. From Kuro we learned that Luffy will never sacrifice or betray his crew. From Krieg we learned that Luffy has grit and improves himself rather than relying on tools. When Arlong is talking about Nami, he's saying things that on first glance seem fine. He's praising her skills, calling her a genius, and these things are true. There's nothing more tragic and stupid than wasting one's gifts. I think some of my teachers said similar sounding things in school, so sure. Drawing charts for me allows Nami to do the thing she loves best. That for me part is a bit suspect. Think you can use that girl as well as I do. Use? From Arlong, this is what we learn about Luffy. He will never use his crew. He values and treasures their skills, recognizes that they make up the difference where he falls short, but he'll never make them do these things for him. Luffy will joyfully have his crew do what they do best, use their gifts, do what they love, but he won't restrict them. He may be their captain, but he'll never abuse their love of swordsmanship, cooking, navigating, or even lying to get them to do things that they don't want to do. To Luffy, being a pirate means being free, and that freedom should extend to his crew. So, as soon as Luffy learns what Arlong thinks about Nami, what this room is used for, Luffy stops attacking Arlong. He came here because Nami asked for help, because she was crying. He thought that because she was shouting Arlong's name, he was the problem. After all, he hasn't been on this island very long. But now Luffy understands what Nami needs to be free. It's not Arlong's defeat. It's the destruction of this room. She may have chosen to join Arlong's crew, chosen to draw maps for him, but to Nami this chart room was a prison, so it must be destroyed. Starting with the desk, then bookshelves, chairs, stacks of ocean charts. Even when Arlong pins Luffy down, Luffy doesn't concern himself with freeing himself from Arlong's grip, he instead destroys more of the room. Arlong says that Luffy's destroying 8 years of hard work, but in Luffy's mind he's destroying 8 years of Nami hating doing what she loves, destroying 8 years of horrible memories. He's erasing the history of her oppression. When Luffy brings the battle axe down, he isn't even aiming at Arlong, he's facing away. He's focused on destroying the room. Arlong just got in the way. When Luffy emerges from the rubble, he doesn't ask Nami but tells her, "You're one of us now," or better said, "You're no longer part of Arlong's crew, you are free." And she is. And now it's time for the wrap-up part of the arc. Let's speed through it. Once again, this dang Luffy fella, when asked about a position in his crew that he's missing, once again talks about how he wants a musician first. Come on, man, Zoro is literally getting stitched up in front of you. You need a doctor. We also get our first instance of a post-Luffy liberation party featuring all the staples, music, dancing, booze, this weird chopstick nose thing, and importantly for Luffy, meat. Our monster trio is doing their thing. Zoro's drinking, Sanji's taking it easy and sampling the local cuisine, and Luffy is stuffing his face with as much meat as he can hold. Usopp, ever the storyteller, is likely embellishing his own tale of heroism, but with the rest of the crew uninterested in recounting the events of the day, I suppose he's the only one who will. We cut to Nami having her Arlong crew tattoo removed, and in a simple but profound way she dwells briefly on the fact that it'll never be completely gone, that a time with Arlong will leave a scar, certainly on her body, but also in ways that aren't physical. Scars may fade, and the horror of Arlong may become a distant memory, but it's a part of Nami's life that she'll always carry with her. But what can help hide a scar of this nature? The things that bring Nami joy, a tattoo which symbolizes things that make her happy, a tangerine for her family, and the pinwheel Genzo wore to make her smile. That may mask the physical scar, but what about the emotional one? Well, I think it's a cool detail that Genzo is still wearing his pinwheel when he talks to Luffy at Bellemere grave. When we see him next, he's without it, and we see that he's left it at Bellemere's grave. I think the reason he leaves it there is because Luffy says he'll never do anything to make Nami unhappy. Genzo originally wore the pinwheel to make Nami smile and laugh, but now he's handed over that responsibility to Luffy and the crew. They will be in charge of getting her emotional scars to fade. And so, after a night of partying, we get to Nami's farewell. In my Issues with One Piece live action video, where I go into detail about why I think they made a few massive missteps during Arlong Park, which is why I held my tongue during this part, one of the biggest arguments in the comments was, does Nami steal from civilians? Specifically, if it was in character for live action Nami to steal from Kaya. Now, definitively, using only the manga as reference, up to this point the answer is a firm no. However, Nami obviously steals the wallets of all the residents of Cocoa Village when she leaves, as many on the opposite side of the argument point out. So does that mean the fact about her character has changed? If you're looking only on the surface level, maybe you can interpret it that way. I think the real answer is much more meaningful. Putting aside the fact that Nami left the 93 million she collected, and the fact that the island has access to the money Arlong was collecting, to answer why she stole their wallets, we have to think back on two things. First, when was the last time Nami stole anything from the village? Well, it was that book 8 years ago, the day that Arlong arrived on her island, the last day she was able to laugh from her heart. The village knew her as a little troublemaker, a thief, but it was that young troublemaker that was the happy little scamp that they cared about. Once Arlong came along, all of that changed as she took on her burden. So reason number one why she steals their wallets. It shows them that finally, after 8 years, Nami is free. She can be who she was before Arlong. She can finally be herself again. I feel like that first reason is obvious, but the second reason is more my opinion and related to the question, why didn't Nami steal from civilians? Well, because she realized how important money can be to civilians. That when pirates come and say, your money or your life, if they don't have enough money, then it could indeed cost them their lives, just as it did for Bellemere. She can't have that possibility on her conscience, ergo she doesn't steal from civilians, even rich ones like Kaya. Pirates get their money from plundering the innocent, at least in her experience, so to steal from them is fine. So what is she saying when she steals from her village? Her village has been scraping together the tribute for the last 8 years, suffering and living in fear under Arlong. They've all surely been worried every day, will we have enough money this time? So Nami stealing the wallets is saying, you no longer have to pay Arlong. You no longer have to be fearful of not having enough. You no longer have to be burdened by the tribute. You are safe. And I think that message is worth the cost of a wallet. Genzo gets Luffy to reaffirm his promise, Nami gives her village a genuine beaming smile, and Luffy and the crew sail off onto their next adventure. Whew, that's a lot of stuff, so let's get to our end of arc items, what this arc teaches us about characters, world, and themes. I'll skip talking about characters since the last video and this video were all about the characters and jump straight into world building. Let's summarize what we've learned. That other sentient races exist in the world of One Piece, which opens the door for other sentient races to exist. Specifically in this arc, fishmen and mermaids, if Sanji is to be believed. The introduction of the 7 warlords of the sea, and an illustration on how damaging such a system can be for the places inhabited by these pirates. We learn a place called Fishman Island on the Grand Line. We see Denden Mushi for the first time, or as the translation calls them, telesnails, showing that the One Piece world contains methods for long-distance communication, which are apparently snails. Why snails? Dunno. They can also function as a fax machine. We're also getting a brief glimpse into the Navy bureaucracy, what we learn will be, bounty process and how that happens. And we also learn that Marines aren't always forced to follow immoral orders, that the hierarchy that may have been defied during Morgan's introduction may just be followed. It's important that Arlong and his crew are pirates from the Grand Line. With this victory, Luffy and his crew have defeated a Grand Line pirate crew. In a way, it's Oda telling us that after all their trials and tribulations on the East Blue, they're finally ready to take on the Grand Line and the pirates they'll find there. On a more meta world-building level, in the same way we learned that Oda drip feeds us context through how Morgan appeared during Kuro's flashback, we learned that Oda does the same thing with his character designs. That something that may seem strange, like Genzo's pinwheel or Nojiko's tattoos, will often get revealed to have more significance than just Oda wanted to design some wacky guy with a pinwheel in his hat. It teaches the audience that we shouldn't be looking at a character's design at face value, and we should instead ask why a character has a certain design, since Oda may take 20 chapters or even more to give us a reason. There is also a new cover story, this time covering Kobe, though I'll cover its contents next video. Either way, we learned that cover story with Buggy wasn't just a one-off occurrence. Finally, our themes. We'll start with the ever-popular Luffy Liberation Loop. And this time we can add a 4th step to the usual 3-step structure. Once Luffy has completed a liberation, it's time to have a giant party. This is also Luffy's largest liberation so far. Not only does he free Nami from Arlong, liberate her from the shackles of her burden, but he also inadvertently ends up liberating an entire island. I'll say it again, Luffy did not go and confront Arlong to free Cocoa Village and the rest of the island, he only went there for Nami. The rest of the island being free is completely incidental to him, though he's not going to turn down the resulting party. A surprising theme that one wouldn't expect from their goofy pirate manga is that of racial supremacy, or rather how racial supremacy is dumb. That sure, you may have a bit of an advantage due to your natural inclinations, but with tenacity, hard work and creativity, you can overcome those differences. It's interesting that Oda introduces this concept first from the perspective of Fishman's superiority, when we'll later learn that it's a completely different supremacy which is really the cause of many of the One Piece world's issues. And those questions, what does it mean to be a pirate, and why does Arlong fall short when coming up against Luffy? Well, Luffy's just about to get his first bounty, the true sign of a pirate, or at least being recognized as one by the world government. And why does he get it? Yep, as I mentioned before, it's because he did something the Marines didn't like. It doesn't matter if what he did was good, if it made others happy, a bounty is a reflection that you're doing something the government doesn't approve of. And why does Arlong fall short of Luffy? Well, does he? Let's think back to what I said about Arlong and what he teaches us about Luffy. That Luffy recognizes his shortcomings while Arlong thinks voicing these shortcomings out loud makes you lack dignity. Sure, Luffy manages to defeat Arlong, and you could say that Arlong lost to Luffy because he relied too much on his racial characteristics and was too sure that racial superiority was enough to have him defeat Luffy. But that's too much like the lesson we learned from Krieg. Rather, I think the real lesson is that Arlong falls short not because of Luffy, but because of the people supporting Luffy. If Luffy was alone, he would have drowned, that would have been it. But the combined effort of his crew, as well as assistance from Genzo and Nojiko, meant that he survived and was able to come back and defeat Arlong. And I think I'll end it on that note. There's only 6 more chapters to go until we reach the Grand Line, until we complete the East Blue portion of the story, and only 2 more videos until this series is completed. What do you think I missed? Did I not talk enough about the lovable Hachi? Did I need to explicitly say the reason Nojiko got her tattoos? What other things can we take away from Arlong Park? Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing from you all. After all, it's not I attempt new things, it's we attempt new things. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a fruitful day.